Like, if there was any time for the big bad government to come down and lay the law down, it's like during a pandemic, right? Like, that's like the one time you really would want government to kind of restrict people because you're saving lives. Are COVID lockdowns ethical? So this is going to depend a lot on your society, on the country that you live in, and what, you have a more individualistic society, or do you have a more collectivist society? So I'll give you a couple examples. Here in the United States, right now, as I'm filming this, there's a bajillion, trillion, kabillion COVID cases. We do not have the ability in the United States to stop the spread of COVID. In China, which is much more accepting of a, I guess we'll say, collectivist nature, basically, hey, let's all do what the government says because, like, this is if there was any time for the big bad government to come down and lay the law down, it's like during a pandemic, right? Like, that's like the one time you really would want government to kind of restrict people because you're saving lives. So I recently read that in China, which has, they have like 200 cases a day. In the United States, it's tens of thousands. Okay, right now, they mandated that within 2 days, basically like everyone in these huge regions get tested. Tens of millions of people, 2-3 days, you have to go and get a COVID test, in the entire city. And can you imagine like the governor of Texas mandating that everyone in the Dallas-Fort Worth area within 2 days had to go get a COVID test? Like, it is almost laughable for those living in the United States to even imagine that reality. Happens in China. And that's, if you're testing, like if the entire state of Texas got a COVID test right now, that would be really good in reducing the spread of COVID, I would imagine. So, when we're talking about lockdowns and mask mandates and vaccination mandates, like, it depends what's important. And that is not a question for me, that's a personal question. On one hand, you have the science, which is pretty good, but at this point in time of filming, COVID is relatively new. It's not, we know pretty well, but we still don't know, exactly like how effective is a mask. And then there's a new variant. Well, how effective are masks with those variants? On the flip side, but we understand it pretty well, but not perfectly. And then on the flip side, you have if people are getting sick and dying, and I think there's a ethical issue here because when, for the most part, if you eat unhealthily, right, you're really only hurting yourself in theory. If you have, let's just say if you have diabetes and you're not keeping tabs on your insulin levels, your blood sugar levels, you're hurting yourself. And there is it's not the government's job to sort of paternally tell you what to do. There is this ethical ripple. It's different ethically with COVID because you could potentially be harming others. It's probably a little closer to rules against drunk driving. We tell you what you can and cannot do with your body and with substances, and that if you are in certain states, like, you can't do this. You can't, sell drugs because of ancillary harms to other people as well as to yourself. So where that exact balance is between restricting what people can do and protecting people from getting sick and dying against their will, that's really tricky. Clearly, you are seeing most of the entire world, especially the United States, really struggle finding the right balance. And part of the reason is that, ethics is very situationally dependent. If we had, I'll just talk about American society, right? If we had 100 cases in the entire U.S., having mask mandates and vaccination mandates and shutting society down, I would say most Americans would say that was unethical. If there's 100 cases of COVID, like, no big deal in the entire United States. If there's 100 million cases of COVID, and like millions of people are dying, then I think a majority of Americans are going to be like, okay, we need some sort of something here. So the order of magnitude of how dangerous the risk actually is to other people is very important. And because, at least during this pandemic, it has come and gone, it has waxed and waned. Sometimes cases have been low and you have the spike and it's really dangerous. I think the ethics and where you might stand change dynamically, right? Depending on the caseload in your area. So, with all that being said, I have not answered this question at all. And I don't know if there is a good answer, at least in the United States. In other nations where protecting society has a larger footprint, I think generally state action to ensure the safety of the people, of their citizens, is seen as more ethical. That is not the culture we have in the United States, or at least in parts of the United States. There are certainly large groups of Americans who feel that way, and there are groups of Americans who feel differently. And those sides get to battle it out, and that's sort of what you've been seeing. So I don't think there is a universal, like, okay, mask mandates are ethical when because of X and Y, blah, blah, blah. If you gave me all the exact numbers, like, here's the mortality rate, here's the caseload, here's how many people are vaccinated, here's how effective the vaccines are, here's how effective the masks are, here's what the community spread rate is, here's what percent is elderly and immunocompromised and at risk. Like, if you gave me all the variables, I could probably come up with I'm going to lean on the generally ethical, generally unethical side of things. I could run the formula for this. But just, our mask, is vaccination mandates ethical, just as a blanket statement, very much depends on the circumstances. So I should just end on saying that I am pro-vaccine, just in case anyone was wondering. But that is going to be something society has to figure out, much like a lot of these questions. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Like, I'm not, I don't get to make these decisions. Where you stand ethically on these is a personal decision. I can personally think you're wrong, and that, my version of, what's important ethically is, superior to yours. But it does depend on the facts and the situation, for sure.